Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. Firstly, sorry if I sound a bit bunged up. I picked up some cold. My son goes to all these classes where there are lots of parents and kids, and there's always bugs going round. It seems I've got one. So sorry if I sound a bit choppy in the audio. Anyway, I saved this tweet from this guy a while ago, and it's a really interesting tweet. It's from this guy who I assume is some sort of pan-spiritualist, a perennialist maybe, an esotericist. And he's making a case that you don't have to believe Jesus existed or didn't. You don't have to believe in the Christian tradition. You just need the real raw experience of Christ consciousness, also sometimes known as Krishna consciousness in perennialist circles, because they're not specific to a given tradition. They just believe there is an eternal sacred truth that's manifest differently through the different traditions. And why I wanted to cover this is because I believe this issue is absolutely massive in contemporary spirituality, but also for the contemporary Western world. Because on the one side, we have this growing New Age, more mystic flavour, where they're not so fussed about institutional religion at all. In fact, very often, they'll actively dislike it. They'll see it as egoic. They'll see it as the realm of people who are in their mind, intellectual. They say that you must believe everything literally, and in that they lose the real magic of spirituality and what the real teaching is. In Buddhism, you might say you're mistaking the finger for the moon. The idea is the finger points to the moon, but the institution looks at the finger and says, well, I don't see the moon there, but it's pointing to the moon. And you can't really touch the moon in the way you could a finger, but you can experience it. Now, on the flip side, of course, you have the more mainstream spirituality, or religion, really, I should say. This has gained a lot of purchase in the online world, especially the online right in recent years, although arguably the woke left too. And this is where you will get the down-the-line values. You know, you must live X way. It's the classic thing that modernity pushes against. You know, religion told us to not touch your winky, so go and watch all the pornography you like. Masturbate every day. Who cares? It's all good. Don't listen to those religious idiots. And they sort of go to the other extreme. Now, you get a lot of the trad folks who will align with Christianity for this reason, and I think it would be a legitimate criticism that some of them maybe ignore some of the actual teachings of Jesus, because of what they're seeking is the values and a path of masculine growth. Now, as you might imagine, I'm very much sympathetic to both, and that's really rare, because they really tend to be at odds with each other, these two. And in a way, what I'm trying to do on this channel is unite a bridge between them, because I think that is desperately needed and really vital in our culture. Now, again, on the sort of esoteric, even traditionalist, now this is a very weird semantic thing here. When I say traditionalist, that doesn't mean tradition of the institution. Traditionalism as a philosophical and spiritual movement is actually perennialism. It's again the idea that there is one sacred truth, and it's experienced in different ways through the different traditions, Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, and so on. And each of those have their uniqueness due to the people and the times in which they were created. Then you have a traditionalism in a political context, which is basically just hyper-conservatism. Now, they're different things. And the spiritual traditionalists don't tend to like the traditional religionists, and vice versa. The spiritual traditionalists will see them as, egoic, lost in the mind, very closed people, somewhat spiritually immature. And the religious traditionalists will see the esoteric traditionalists as sort of mumbo-jumbo, wacky, call yourself moonbeam and put some sort of feather through your nose to prove you're spiritual. Now, as I say, I actually have sympathy for both sides, which is really rare. But I'll explain why in this video. It's exactly why I wanted to cover it. I believe this is vital for the future of the Western world and Western civilization. So let's start with this statement, which is very well written from this, I assume he's sort of a New Age spiritualist type. Did Jesus exist? He asks. It doesn't matter. In light of the Christian tradition of Easter, here's some food for thought. If you truly have Christ in your heart and have found the kingdom within, as Jesus said, you won't be concerned with whether Jesus was, quote, real, historically or not. You won't feel the need to prove or defend the crucifixion and resurrection as literal events, rather than esoteric symbols found across various spiritual traditions. With Christ alive within you, the outer exoteric forms of Christianity lose their grip. You don't need to thump the Bible or proclaim Christ is King. You don't need to accept him as your saviour in the way dogma prescribes. Get baptised or make a public declaration that you're now a Christian. You don't need to go to church, wear a cross around your neck, or display any outward symbols, because no symbol can substitute for the living experience of Christ within you. In truth, all external identification, symbols, and exoteric performances can actually obstruct the direct inner communion with the divine. Ultimately, you don't care about the label Christian at all. You no longer need it because you've found the kingdom within. They're very, very well written, and that will wind up the religious traditionalists, as you might imagine. They'd say this is exactly wrong. Christ does say I'm the only way, you have to accept me. And they will take a much more literal line of Christianity. No, you must go to church, you must take on all of the basis of the, catechumen they call it in the Catholic Church, going through that process of learning and accepting the dogma. I think you get it in the Orthodox Church too. Now, I'm actually very sympathetic to what this guy is saying, because I would agree that a lot of the religious symbology can actually block you from experiencing God. And I think there's a lovely saying in one of the books I was reviewing recently for the series on masculine spiritual initiation, that sometimes we can be praying so loud we miss what God is trying to show us. Because we've been trained in this way, which is making the mind louder and telling us to tell God what he should do, rather than being still and listening to that voiceless voice of guidance. And I think there is some real important lessons in there for us, in the sense of letting go to a mystical divine wisdom which is beyond ourselves. And in a way, why that's so important is because it limits us as human beings. And the real sin in spirituality is thinking we know more than God, and trying to tell God what God is, rather than being still and allowing God to express himself as he is, being as you are. That seems to me to be absolutely vital. I'd argue it's one of the reasons why Christianity has fallen apart in the Western world, because it's become too material. And on the material plane, you're just going to get the atheist saying, well, God's not behind a cloud. This is all nonsense. How can you argue this against modern science? It's madness. But again, that's because we've taken away the mystic heart, the experiential, transcendental experience of love and what that means. And I think this is what this fella is talking towards. However, that all said, while I would agree with him in that capacity, I think we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater when we say that the institution is basically irrelevant, which is what this guy is saying. I think that's wrong. Now, it's not because what this guy is saying is untrue. It's the implied association he makes that the dogma doesn't matter at all. And I would say that's wrong for one vital reason. Society, civilization needs a backbone. And we could view it in a way, I suppose the first thing we have to accept is that hierarchy is natural in life. That might be seen as a classic right-wing position, but I believe it to be true. I don't believe everybody can be Cristiano Ronaldo, just like I don't believe everybody can be this guy who's very spiritually insightful, or everybody can be Meister Eckhart or St. John of the Cross. I believe some people are endowed with spiritual gifts, others practical gifts, others intellectual gifts, and so on. And in life, we need hierarchies to allow those people to rise to the top to teach the rest of us in whatever domain they may well dominate. And that's exactly the same in the spiritual domain. So the people that, if you like, go to the mystic heart and have real experiences of love, which we can check by the authenticity of their teaching and the fruits they produce as Christ teaches, then we can see that these people are our guides. They're spirit guides who found the way. And these people, again, in a way the church has done, need to be sanctified. They need to be the saints. Like if you read the famous St. Francis prayer, it's a beautiful prayer that is really, you can just tell it's from beyond this world. It's by a man who's genuinely experienced the divine. Go and read it. It's absolutely beautiful. And it challenges us as human beings to really live by love. Now, again, there's a reason why that figure holds such a special place. And it's not to say that you can't have the insights that St. Francis had. Christ is within you. There's no doubt about that. But it's not going to appeal to everybody, as you may have experienced in your life. Speak about this stuff to a, quote, normie. They'll just be like, what are you talking about? And that's fine. It doesn't interest them. Maybe they're excellent at sports, or maybe they're a very practical person and they're great as an engineer. That's cool. That's the way the universe, God wants them. But what I'm saying here is we need to have that hierarchy, and although the dogma, I would argue, largely can be corrupted because it's worldly, it doesn't mean we don't need it. It doesn't mean we don't need the external symbols, because they're going to help people on their journey when they're at a lower level of understanding. It doesn't mean they can't reach the level of understanding that this guy has, or the other great saints have, or even beyond that. But we need a structure to guide society. So the way we could understand it is something like transcendent love is reality. God is reality. Life is reality. Being is reality. When we say love, remember, we don't mean Hollywood smoochy woochy. We mean understanding the other is yourself. That we're all the sunlight of God manifest. Something like that. However, we have a fallen nature, a broken nature. So we get lost in ourselves. We think in a human-centric way. But every now and again we get these divine figures which show us the true light of love, show us the true way. And that, if you like, needs to trickle through the system right down to the people who may not have that will within them or capacity to experience those divine lessons. But they do need the truth to sustain them. And what that might be is how the love starts off raw and it's passed down and institutionalized so people can understand it at its lower levels. And that might be something like we have the norm of, say, marriage. Now, some of you might say, well, I disagree with marriage. That's absolutely fine, but just for principle of the theory, just try and go with it. The reason we have marriage is because, as Paul teaches, we should really be focusing on the spiritual life. And if you're a man like me, you'll be aware that the sexual dimension can pull you away from the spiritual life. It is tempting to want to go and sleep with women. It's tempting to want to have your eyes pulled away from the spirit and into the world, which is represented by women. Now, it's not to say that female beauty is bad. It's not bad, it's beautiful. But can we be trusted with it to deal with it responsibly? In my experience, most men can't. They get too lost in it. It becomes an obsession. They want that woman more than anything. They want to have all the notches on their bedpost. They ogle women on the street. They're lost in lust. And that's not a judgment. I'm there. Most of us are. It takes effort and work to overcome that, or at least work with it. And Paul says, well, what we need is marriage, because what that does is it binds the man and woman together in holy union. It gives him the sexual outlet in a healthy way, and it allows him to be the bind for the family. And of course, this is why, historically at least, being a playboy, being a womanizer, cheating, was seen as extremely bad. Because again, it broke the social contract, it broke the spiritual contract, and if you like, it was a real turn away from what is the spiritual life. That doesn't mean it's easy. You know, I know marriage is hard, I'm married myself, but it is more vital for you and for the society and for us spiritually. And that's the way that we organise a society. Because if everybody's trying to sleep with each other all the time, you have all issues of abandonment, betrayal, lust, addiction, all sorts of madness comes in, which we're now experiencing in the modern West. OnlyFans and so on. It's just getting wackier and wackier. And it speaks more and more to our lower nature. And remember, Adam was got at by the snake via his lower nature. He used Eve to get to Adam. Lust, essentially. So what I'm saying here is, this is from a meta view how we understand how love functions in the society, but we need the great divine spirits to show us the way, you know, and then that can manifest across the society. Now, this speaks to the bridge I'm talking about between the mystic tradition and the worldly tradition, something that we've completely lost, but I believe it's vital for Christianity to reconstruct. And if it doesn't, I really think it will just fall into the world, which we're seeing happen in a way. On the one side, it's becoming trad political conservative. On the other, woke, you know. And they just say, well, Christ, you know, he would have accepted gays and loved gays. Well, yeah, of course Christ would have loved gays, but it wasn't exactly the traditional view of the union between the masculine and feminine. You know, this LGBTQ pride marches. That's not Christian. It's not Christian because, you know, it's some hard law about blah, blah, blah. That's just a cheap imitation of the message of love, which is the reality of the LGBTQ pride stuff, is it veers off way into degeneracy. And I think that's pretty well established now. Because the liberal mainstream say, oh, you're so hateful. It's actually the opposite of hate, but that's a video for another time. The core point here is that we need to remember the mystic heart and the value of the tradition, because it's the mystic heart which teaches us love. There's the lovely teaching from a Christian monk. I can't remember exactly who it was, but someone asked him, what's the greatest teaching? And he said, love and do what you like. And then we need to apply that to the tradition. And we need to remember and be very wise that the tradition is about the balance. So it's not necessarily hard line boundaries, and it's not necessarily accepting everything. In the modern era, we think love is licentiousness, compassion, accepting everything. It's loving to be like, yeah, I don't care, do whatever. That's not loving. That's just accepting licentiousness, and that will lead to chaos, sin, death, and decay. What we need are wise boundaries. That's what the institution is for. That's what the tradition is for. And we need those figures who can commune with the mystic truth in order to find that correct boundary. So in some senses, maybe we need a hard boundary, a strong masculine boundary. At other times, maybe we need to be compassionate and open and understanding, just like a son and a father. At times, you might need to be really strict with your son and let him know that behaviour is not good, and you're going to come down on him like a ton of bricks. It's a paternal duty. At other times, if he's trying his best and he's failing at something, but he's really got it in him to do it, you're going to need to be compassionate and motivational. And it's exactly the same on the meta level when we look across the civilization. But we need the institution and the mystic. And if these can align, if we can find that lovely line between the world and the spirit, if you like, that's when we have a real chance at becoming a true civilization once more. In fact, an evolved civilization. As always, I believe this journey begins with us as individuals. That's why I'm promoting the 7 steps. This is the work I'm doing with guides. I'm going to hold a free call on it soon on the Substack. Do join down below. It's free. If you can pay £5 a month, you can join the monthly calls where you can connect with me, get exclusive content and so on. I know this is a bit of a heavy video for some, but it's so important. It is so important, this stuff, for the future of our tradition and our spiritual health. Anyway, thank you for listening. Do enjoy the rest of your day, and God bless.